if you're a keen observer, you may have noticed that things are happening in the traditional broadcast media that seem to highlight a shift towards more controversial and some would say extreme views. And to underscore this point, something recently happened in the UK on one of the country's newest channels. GB News prides itself on broadcasting the views of people who may not get a look in elsewhere. One of its regular contributors is a former actor called Lawrence Fox, and he recently made some comments so controversial that the channel suspended him. Mr. Fox was talking about another female commentator, Ava Santina, who has a rather left-wing perspective, often with a strong feminist viewpoint. Well, Lawrence Fox doesn't take kindly to that kind of thing, but rather than just challenge her views, he proceeded to rant about how he would not wish to have sex with her, and he suggested that no normal man would want to have sex with her. Well, that perhaps gives you an idea of the intellectual level of Lawrence Fox and his arguments. Well, now the GB News presenter interviewing him was a right-wing columnist for a conservative newspaper, and he allowed Lawrence Fox to continue and in fact chuckled at some of what he said. There were lots of complaints about this, and this time it seems Lawrence Fox went too far and was suspended by GB News. So a controversial person says something controversial on television, and suddenly there's enormous press and social media coverage. But why is this significant? Well, it's because it's focusing attention on the rapidly changing face of broadcast news around the world, including here in Nigeria, where editorializing rather than analyzing seems to be getting in the way of balance. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by Arise correspondent Judita Dasilva, and here in the studio I'm also joined by the former Director General of the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, Dr. Ladan Salihu, who's also former Head of Public Affairs at Nigeria's broadcast regulator, NBC. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for joining us. And let me come to you, Dr. Ladan Salihu, first. I mean, how much does this focus attention on the rapidly changing face of broadcasting, not just in Britain, but in other countries as well, including Nigeria, where we are seeing more editorializing creeping into the output?
Well, first of all, we must appreciate the complexities and the dynamics of change in the global broadcast industry, which Nigeria is no exception. In addition to what you just said, Charles, you remember in April this year, CNN had to sack John Lemon. For what was termed to be sexist comments. Incidentally, in the same hour, you remember Tucker Carlson of Fox News was equally sacked. And I think he was also found, torn in between loyalty to Rupert Murdoch and loyalty to Donald Trump. Back in Nigeria, there are also intricacies and incidents of a kind of myriad of challenges that have faced the broadcast industry. I remember when I was a reporter in NTA, one day we woke up and we had this report about the death of late Chief Nnamdi Azikiwe. Apparently, the man at that point in time, the gentleman, statesman, former president of Nigeria, was not dead at that time. So you have these things do happen. The challenge we have is how do we appreciate the role of the media in national development in times of politics, in times of campaigns and elections, and in times of national challenges, of emergencies, of force majeure, and other aspects. Now, as we speak, we have right now on air, when I last checked, we have about 777 broadcast stations functional in Nigeria. 177 of those stations are TV stations, including, Arise. and the rest, of course, broadcast stations. You will find that the juxtaposition and conglomeration of these broadcast stations will pose a challenge not only to the media practitioners, but to the regulator and to the political terrain. So it is a lot of contradictions of a sort. You find out that in trying to treat issues in the newsroom, in programs, definitely we are beginning to see a shift from reporting to editorializing and commentary, mainly because of the population explosion and the number of stations and the hunger for information.
Right, and the competition.
And the competition in the system. So,
okay, I'm going to come back to you and on that in just a minute, because obviously social media is also putting on its own pressures. But let me come to you, Judita, in London. Good to see you again, by the way. It's been a wee while, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. But I mean, broadcasting generally worldwide has always been regulated to the extent that the news had to be balanced. But has Fox News in America and GB News in the UK turned all that on its head, so that now you're having broadcasters that set out to project only one viewpoint?
I think it's kind of a question of the chicken and the egg, because if you kind of look at the fundamentals of what defines each entity, which is what is broadcast media and the news, and those who diffuse it, you realize that throughout history, be it from the Bolshevik uprising to the rise of the Nazi Party to World War I, news is basically the omniscient narrator to human existence. It's new because it's happening now. We report it as it happens. You exist as a byproduct of what is happening in society and the evolution of it. The reason Fox News and GB News are what they are today is they are a reaction to seismic events that have happened in socio-political existence. That's kind of what news always has been. And the two things I say, which we are going to go on to discuss, are the two important events that made things like Fox News and GB News possible is the presidency of Donald Trump and the rise of the power of social media. When you exist in an evolving, a constantly moving space, which is broadcast media reporting on human existence, you always have to be reactionary to the tone of the day. And what you have in 2023 is the arbiters of what is current, what is exciting, what gets clicks, which is the currency, most valuable currency today, attention and clicks, are people like millennials and Gen Z. And what they like is an opinion you have and stick to. Broadcast media has always prided itself on being objective, being pragmatic. It seems like in 2023, there is no space for that if you want attention. You've got to pick a side and stick to it. That's what Fox News does. That's what GB News does. People like to know that whether you have an opinion that people don't like or not, you will stand 10 toes down in it. And it's up to the consumption of people to decide, do I like it or not?
That's a very interesting analysis. And on the back of that, let me come to you, Dr. Ladan Salihu, because of course, as Judita said there, a lot of people are getting a lot of their news from social media, which often reflects only the viewpoint they want. Would it be fair to say that a lot of people have got used to that and they don't want balanced broadcasting, and in fact find it rather boring to hear on the one hand this, on the other that, and there's evidence that some people actually get angry when they hear alternative views? I mean, how difficult has that made things for traditional broadcasters? I mean, you ran a major the national broadcaster in Nigeria. You were the Director General. You were also part of the regulator, NBC.
Well, we have a kind of puzzle, a conundrum, sort of, professionally. The adage of he who pays the piper dictates the tune has found expression in terms of the control and management of public broadcast stations on one hand, and the ownership or proprietorship of private broadcast stations on the other. Caught in between the two is the role of the editor, the reporter, the presenter to toe the line of professionalism and ensure that in mediating the issues, he stands firm in public interest, convenience, and necessity. So, like I said earlier on, we have a growing population, most of it young, that are hungry for information and are looking for options to be educated and to be informed and even to be entertained. And they have found, I must say, the mainstream media, both especially the public ones, to be a bit sluggish, a bit uncompetitive, a bit unexpressive, and therefore they have found some expression in the social media. And I must say, Charles, there is something that is becoming worrisome, what I will term as militant journalism that has found its way into the social media, where if you get to a certain broadcast station and you don't have your views aired, he picks up a camera, goes to the side of the alley, sends out a clip. Whether that clip is balanced or not, whether it is staged or choreographed, nobody knows. And so you find out that there is a gravitation from the mainstream media to the social media. And it behoves on us, you, and others in the quality mainstream media to begin to look at perspectives and the ways and means of gathering information and disseminating same. Else, we continue along this line, is going to be perilous for both the mainstream public media and even the private media.
That's an interesting viewpoint. Let me come to you, Judita, because you are prominent both on traditional media and social media. I mean, you're prominent in, broadcasting in Britain, broadcasting in Nigeria. Here we are on Arise News right now. And of course, a lot of these traditional broadcasters want to hold on to their audiences, don't they? I mean, that's really the key point. So a lot of them are pushing the bar of what is considered acceptable broadcasting in order to sound more like what we're seeing on social media or on Fox News or on GB News. I mean, do you agree with that sort of perspective?
I do, but it's it's similar to a lot of industries like the movie industry, the music industry. At the end of the day, broadcast media is a business. There are number crunchers, there are accountants, there are CEOs, there are director generals that you have to make it a profitable business. And when your customer is ultimately the opinion of individuals you will never see or never meet, it is like you're constantly spinning several plates. But at the end of the day, you have to get traction. So you have to listen to, it's almost like the traditional media created a Frankenstein monster. And what do I mean by that? Let's take it from this perspective of Black people. The rise of social media has been so important for things like Black Lives Matter, because when you hear the dialogue of Black people, what do they always say? Traditional media in the West presents us a certain way because it helps to sustain the status quo. So like what the former DG said, you can have Black people presented a certain way, but all I need to do is pick up my phone and tell my truth, and I have the truth out there. That is what resonates with younger people. They don't want to be dictated to. They don't want you to deign to give them what information you feel they need. They have to be the architect of understanding what they feel is relevant to the lives that they live. So what you have now is broadcast media needs to understand how to create personalities, not just conduits for information, which is what the traditional broadcast journalist should be. Now you have to be a personality, because that's how you get people who connect with you, listen to you, and care about what you are talking about. And unfortunately, your personality comes to play. And like we saw with Lawrence Fox and Daniel Wooten, if you upset people, there will be consequences. But that's the gauntlet you must run in order to be a competitor in the ring of broadcast journalism today.
That's the other side of the Mason-Dixon line, as it were. I like your assessment there. And Dr. Ladan Salihu, within that traditional media, you also have lots of government-controlled stations, don't you? Iranian, Arab, Chinese, Russian, and even in Nigeria here. A lot of them run by governments that want to push a particular narrative and don't want to be subject to neutrality rules, do they?
Yes, of course, in all of it is a competition for, the marketing of agenda. The agenda setting in the media is now, if you like, being kind of tossed around and, microwaved internationally, where you find, certain nations setting up broadcast stations, not necessarily for the issues of profit, but the profit comes in terms of gaining mileage on public opinion, gaining, relevance in terms of international definitions of geopolitics, whether it is at the United Nations, or other multilateral organizations, to have a kind of mileage over and above other countries in determining the global view of politics and geopolitics.
Now, yeah, that's a good point, actually.
Back in Nigeria, we have a challenge. And the challenge is that I think we are evolving. We're in a state I would call the metamorphosis of broadcasting in Nigeria, where we are gradually getting structured along the lines of what obtains in the media in the United States or even in Britain, where certain broadcast stations have taken it upon themselves to be socially and professionally responsible, to stick to asking the questions and holding both government and politicians accountable for what they do. And some people are not comfortable with that. And so we have a challenge. I envy, my former employer, the National Broadcasting Commission, which, I don't want to massage their ego. They are doing a great job in terms of understanding the dynamics and the challenges. Like I said earlier on at the beginning of the program, we have about 777 broadcast stations on air currently in Nigeria. And the challenge is that from the beginning of the presidential election campaigns to date, they have sanctioned about, I think, 17 TV stations or radio stations, or a combination of both. When you look at the number and the sanctions, you will discover that they've not done badly in terms of regulating and mediating the issues. What we need is perhaps to understand that there must be a meeting point between the broadcaster, the politician, and the regulator. In that way, we will begin to have a kind of synthetic narrative on our goals and aspirations in midwifing a media that will be for national development.
Right. So a kind of synthesis.
Synthesis,
basically.
That was the word. And when you look at, I would like to see a media in Nigeria. If you have this number of stations, Charles, then there must be certain interest in the media you and I, are not talking about, or we don't even know. Is it that the politicians are so much interested in having their opinions heard more than the journalists' interest in disseminating quality, credible information?
Right.
Or is it that we have so much competition? But I want that competition, that energy, those numbers to be channeled across the national canvas in a way that we cover areas that are hitherto not being touched by the mainstream or even the government media. In that way, you will have media situated within the context of national development as a participant.
It's interesting that you say that, because actually for the first time in the history of this country, Nigeria has a president who is a media-owning president. So you've got a president who owns a television station and who owns a national, and these are both national, on a national level, network, and in fact international as well. But let me come to you, Judita. We're in the dying minutes of this very interesting conversation. Where do you think is the likely place that traditional broadcasting will go now?
I believe that it's almost like what the big Hollywood studios have had to do with the onset of streaming. You will have to bend and capitulate in order to survive. And by that, I mean an incorporation of the language of media today, which is social media. And to bring it closer to home, as an organization at Arise News, when we first launched offices in Lagos and Abuja, part of the team actually went to our CEO and said, we have to incorporate social media. We've got to always talk about what's trending. And he looked at us like we were trying to make him age prematurely and like we were insane. But he said, fine, go for it. And now part of my job as content manager for the streaming side is I have to see what gets traction constantly. And it's strange that the minute Arise News taps into something that social media is talking about, numbers spike. So you constantly have a situation where you have the traditional journalists, traditional broadcast journalism, and then you tap into what millennials are talking about, what Gen Z is talking about, and there is a wave of attention, there is a wave of clicks. That is where traditional news and broadcasting will have to go, and some will be dragged kicking and screaming, but some like Arise News will waltz through the doors like Fred Astaire. Because you have to know that to survive, you must adapt. And when you adapt, you show a willingness to understand that the language is constantly evolving and you are a representative of that language being spoken by the people who you are designed to appeal to.
And that's a brilliant way to bring this brilliant conversation to an end. In conclusion, whatever happens, I think we're all agreed that this kind of one-sided social media type viewpoint isn't going to go away. I want to thank both of you very much indeed. Judita Dasilva is Arise correspondent and, of course, content manager for Arise News of social media. She's talking to me there from London. And, of course, the former Director General of the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, Dr. Ladan Salihu, who was also former Head of Public Affairs at Nigeria's broadcast regulator, NBC. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again next week. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and London and Lagos, bye-bye and thank you for watching.